Joining us now is Jasmyne Cannick. Of course, she is a political and social issues commentator. She is no stranger to us here at Spectrum News 1. Joins us all the time, and we always enjoy having her. Jasmyne, just really, we'll start kind of from the beginning. What is your thought? Here we are on Sunday night of what has really been unrest in America, but specifically here in L.A., SoCal, over the last few days.
Well, I think that obviously the strategy has changed in 2020, right? So when you look at the unrest and the protests that are going on, not just in Southern California, but around the country, you find that they are not taking place in black and brown neighborhoods, right? They're taking place in other cities and communities where they feel that, you know, their message will be better heard. People will pay more attention. So when I look at the images of downtown LA and I look at the Fairfax district and I look at Santa Monica, I think I just looked at some stuff going on in Long Beach, and I'm like, okay, you know, this generation, right, has decided that they're going to do things a little differently, right? Because, again, you know, when you know your history, you go back to Watts. And for us here in L.A. County, right, for Southern California, we can go back to 1965. We can go back to Watts. We can go back to 1992 in Los Angeles. And even, you know, 2014 in downtown L.A. with the deaths of Ezell Ford and Mike Brown. And here we are 6 years later in 2020. And this generation is saying, you know, we've picked up this mantle. Unfortunately, they've had to pick up the mantle of fighting police brutality and police killings, but they're doing it their way, right? They're doing it differently. And I find that very interesting when I look at their sort of strategy around where they want to go. Like, you know, when I see places like Huntington Beach and I see places like Anaheim, you know, people, you know, typically I can remember through the years, you know, hearing smart, you know, mouthed comments from people like, oh, keep that in your neighborhood, or, you know, I'm glad they don't come over here. And it's like, oh, well, guess what? You're not immune anymore. This is an issue for us, right? So this is going to be an issue for you. And it's really interesting because when you think about all the stories, Calvin and Kate, we've heard through the recent years of white folks calling the police on black folks for barbecuing at the park, or, you know, sitting in their own home, or walking their dog, or whatever, right? It's like they're going to those neighborhoods, like the people that also contribute to the problems that black and brown people have with the police, right? Because white folks do an awful lot of calling of the police on black people. And so I think that when it becomes an issue for everyone, not just an issue for black and brown people, because as I've been discussing throughout this, you know, we in the black and brown community, you know, unlike the white community where they pass down generational wealth and other things, in our communities, we always have to pass down the talk. We have to pass down how you behave around the police. We have to pass down, you're black, you're brown, this is what you can expect when you're walking home from school or when you're out by yourself. The police may stop you, right? And I just see a generation, a younger generation, that is just like, we're not going to deal with this anymore. You know, it's going to stop with us. And maybe and hopefully, you know, we won't have to pass that down to another generation. Maybe America will finally pay attention and wake up.
Jasmyne, I wonder what kind of advice you have for us in the media as we cover these protests that are kind of, you know, Calvin used the word appropriated almost. I mean, how do we balance vandalism and some of the destruction that we're seeing out of rage because of what's happening, and other groups that seem to be swooping in and being opportunistic and are kind of stealing the messaging that we should be talking about today? Instead, we're talking about looting and small business owners and the destruction. I'm just curious to have you comment on that balance.
I mean, that's really up to you. I mean, the first thing I would say is, of course, hire black and brown reporters, right? Hire black and brown journalists. As you know, we know our communities. We know how to get into our communities, talk to folks in our communities, and we also know the pain that our community is experiencing. But second, you know, you don't have to focus on the looting and the vandalism. I mean, the media chooses to do that. There's a way to talk about what's going on without making the looting and the vandalism the main story. I keep trying to remind people that no real change has ever happened, particularly in Southern California, around the police that didn't involve looting and vandalism. Looting and vandalism happened in 1965. Looting and vandalism happened in 1992. Out of 1992, we got the Christopher Commission, and we got some other significant changes. We got the federal consent decree and some other things that happened with the LAPD. When you look at what happened with George Floyd, the charges, the criminal charges that were filed against the police officer that killed him, that murdered him, were not announced. He wasn't arrested until the day after the police precinct burnt down, right? It's only in these extreme instances do people pay attention. It's unfortunate. It is definitely unfortunate that it takes all of this to get the powers that be, to get everyone to pay attention and to hear the collective cries and the collective, hurt that communities are going through. But this isn't new. And it frustrates me to know that the media likes to focus just on the looting and the vandalism, and they don't really want to focus on the root of what's at all of this. And I also blame the fact that we have a lot of young reporters on the street who really just don't know the history of Southern California. They weren't around. I wasn't around in 1965, but at least I know what went down in 1965. And I definitely know what happened in 1992 because I was a teenager. And I think it would behoove us all to know our history. This is not brand new. This is not new. The only thing that's new is the fact that it's not happening in South LA. It's not happening in Black and brown communities. Today, the fight, the argument, the hurt is being taken into other communities.
Jasmyne, thank you for joining us. But I wanted to have one more with you because you just mentioned something that I think is interesting because you have been a historian of LA and all the things that have happened here when it comes to the Black and brown community and policing. So we've had Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas on, and I asked him the same thing I'm going to ask you. 1992, you were a teenager. You remember the things that happened there. What's the change that you would say we went from there to 2020 when it comes to the relationship with policing? And then I want to ask you this. You mentioned earlier the fact that it's different areas, right? It's Fairfax, it's Santa Monica, it's the Grove. Do you think this will, I guess you could say, escalate or speed up the process of change because it was those areas? So have we really come far up until 2020, and now because of what we're seeing, how much more change will we see because it's been different areas that have been affected?
Look, in 1992, I think I mentioned to you that one of the things that came out of that was the 228-page Christopher Commission report. And in that report, they found this pervasive pattern of excessive use of force by officers. And not only that, they were calling Black people monkeys. They were calling us Zulus. They would say, they would use this code NHI, which, meant no humans involved for, crimes that involved Black victims or Black suspects, right? And I would argue that what has changed is that, we have a bigger bureaucracy. We have a lot more, people who are, working, around, protecting civil rights and this and that in the police department. But when you look at, if you just took the last 5 to 10 years and the number of, thank God, videos that we've had that have come out, particularly in LA. I mean, right before this situation with George Floyd, you may recall we had the video that was released with Richard Castillo, who was brutally assaulted by an LAPD officer in Boyle Heights last month.
Yes.
And so, when I look at all of this, I think to myself that not too much has changed because, again, like I just said, we're still passing down the talk in our communities. We're still having this problem, this back and forth, the killings of Black and brown people, the assaults of Black and brown people by the police. We're still having that on a regular basis. The only difference I see now is that the conversation is elevated to a new level. part of that, right, is because of social media, right, and the ability for us to see these videos. It's no longer our word against the police's word. I think that when you take this fight into communities like Santa Monica and West Hollywood and the west side of LA, you know, yeah, I do think there will probably be something that comes out of that, because what's going to happen is those residents are going to go screaming to their city council members, right? Screaming to their elected officials, screaming at their the leaders of their law enforcement agency, because, you know, they're being affected now. And sometimes that's what we need, because they don't listen to us. And I think, again, that's part of the strategy again. It's like, no, we're going to go over here because over here you're going to pay attention to us. You know, when it happened in our communities, it was just like, okay, as long as it stays over there, you know, as long as they can tear up their neighborhoods, they can do whatever they want. Nobody really cared. But now I see that everybody cares, because it's happening in Pasadena. It's happening, you know, in Santa Monica. It's happening in places where people lived that thought that they were safe and immune from it. And no one is immune. No one is immune. This is an issue all of us should be invested in, and all of us have to work to resolve it.